Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and any friends from beyond the binary, welcome to day 2 of the 2021 CityJS conference. Who here is super excited for an amazing day filled with top tech talks? No one. Oh, I'm just going to go home then. Wait, I am home. We may as well go through with this anyway. Your first speaker of today's conference is SWYX, who is beaming into us from Singapore. SWYX is a senior developer advocate with AWS Amplify, and in this session, SWYX is going to be talking about the third age of JavaScript. Good news, folks. Now that IE 11 is quickly heading out of the door, modules are coming into the browsers, and a whole load of simplifications are on the horizon, according to SWYX, which is music to my ears because today's JavaScript is complicated. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that, right? Well, hopefully in this session we're going to get some insight into some of the things that we can expect over the next decade for our JavaScript tooling. Don't forget, post along on social media using the hashtag CityJS2021, as well as keep those comments rolling in on GatherTown and YouTube. And don't forget, have your questions at the ready for the Q&A session after the talk. Without further ado, SWYX, it is over to you.
Hey everyone, my name is SHAWN. I also go by SWYX on the internet, and I'm here to talk about this idea that I had, and I call it the third age of JavaScript. So this is roughly what we're going to cover, a very broad time span of the history of JavaScript from 1997 and maybe to 2030, 2035. So it's broken down into the first couple of ages, the first age and the second age. We'll explain what we mean by ages and what they represent thematically. And then we'll try to predict the future. Obviously, we don't know what the future is going to hold, but I think we have some pretty good hints kind of coming into the third age of JavaScript. We have ES modules and polyglot tooling, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll project even further beyond that, which is just kind of ridiculous projection into what might be the end of JavaScript. And the whole thesis is that every 10 years, there's kind of like a changing of the guard of JavaScript, and some new theme takes hold, and that starts to be the dominant investment of the entire ecosystem, and that helps to move JavaScript forward in some meaningful way. So let's explore how it has started. So the first stage of JavaScript really took place 1997-2007, taking sort of the 10-year thesis. And it was started based on a lie. If you listen to Brendan Eich when he explains the origins of JavaScript, he did a recent podcast with the Lex Friedman podcast. That was very good. And he also did this presentation in Paris where he talked about the brief history of JavaScript. And he was drawn to Netscape to write scheme in the browser, only to arrive and be told, no, actually you have 10 days to create a pseudo Java language that we can put in the browser and let people execute scripts on. But it turned out that those constraints actually produced a language that was very adaptable and had the right features that actually got pretty massive adoption. So the first 10 years was kind of forming the language. I like to use this chart to show how furiously the standards evolved, and then how it did not evolve for a long, long time, and then how it's picked up back again. So the first 3 years of the formalization of JavaScript, ECMAScript 1, 2, and 3, and then this very long period in between, right? There was an attempt at an evolution, ECMAScript 3.1, but then also a concurrent attempt to take the language even more ambitious steps further for ECMAScript 4. Both of these, nobody really reached any consensus on. And really, I think that the pivotal year, because this almost failed, the pivotal year was in 2008, which we'll talk about later. But in the meantime, the JavaScript ecosystem kind of fractured, right? Like there was basically the dialects path where it was like, okay, we're not going to write, we need more features than JavaScript offers. So we'll just, invent new syntax or just take it a different direction, fork the language basically. So ActionScript and JScript were probably the two better known ones. There's Qt and WMLScript, which I had to research for this talk, but apparently they were a thing. But the other way to tackle language expansion is to just kind of work within its boundaries and invent new APIs that just kind of work within the constraints that you're given. And jQuery, Dojo Toolkit, and MoolTools kind of took that route. And obviously they won, but it wasn't clear at the time. I think the end of the first age kind of drew to a close with some resolution of the schism within JavaScript. And I was really excited to find this blog post by John Resig actually documenting the meeting in Oslo where this took place, where harmony was finally reached. And that's why we call ES5 sort of the harmony edition of JavaScript. It really united the two groups of ECMAScript 3.1 and 4, and really provided a way forward for the unification of the two tracks. And that made for a much stronger foundation to build JavaScript on. For further details, I highly recommend reading JavaScript the First 20 Years, which is kind of a book/paper that was written by Brendan Eich and Alan Worsbrock, and submitted for the ACM and Programming Languages Conference that should have happened last year, but then. But I'd still highly recommend checking it out because it's such a compelling bit of history that's so important to obviously the way that we work, but then the lives of billions of people, and they don't even know it. So let's talk about the second age of JavaScript, now spanning from 2009 to 2019. Obviously, there was a lot going on in the world in 2008 and 9, so the history is a little vague there. But I do think of 2009 as kind of like the rebirth of JavaScript. Like now that we've reached harmony, what can we do with that? So not only do we have ES5, we have the birth of CommonJS as a format. We have the birth of Node.js at JSConf EU. That's Ryan Dahl over there presenting Node.js. And then, of course, Node needs a package manager. Despite Isaac always saying that NPM does not stand for Node Package Manager. Here's proof. This is an email that's still available if you just go to the Google groups where he announced it, that NPM stands for Node Package Manager. So there you go. In 2009, a single year basically established the foundations for everything that we use today. This is everything that is still current, that we would consider modern professional JavaScript. Was born in 2009, and we're still working out the implications. And that's really the power of thinking about these things in terms of ages, right? Like how languages evolve in terms of like, all right, we sorted out the basic language. Now we're sorting out the ecosystem. And the ecosystem formed in a few ways. So the first way, which I think about, is the runtimes, right? We built out the runtime. It happened that Chrome also was born around about 2008, 2009. Alongside of Node.js. Then we built it out in different aspects, right? We wanted to run JavaScript, in native desktops. So then we had Electron, or we had React Native to run it in mobile apps. And then finally, we even have dedicated runtimes like Hermes that are optimized for Android execution. It's just a fascinating history of JavaScript just reaching more and more platforms. Of course, I'm not talking about smaller ones, which I have no idea about, like TV and watches, but you get the drift. We started to evolve runtimes because we have a strong base of JavaScript to build on top of. Then the second way in which the ecosystem evolves is build tools, right? Like we actually started pretty early with CoffeeScripting, Google Closure compiler, or Google Closure as the people call it. Then we had all these, sort of scripting tools and proto build tools, I would say, of Grunt and Webpack, and TypeScript, kind of all in the same period. Gulp also came pretty shortly after, and Tracer I really like because that was the first transpiler before Babel. Babel kind of took over very, very quickly after. But these are all sort of ways in which we started to build bigger and bigger JavaScript apps, and we needed to compile it down to something that we ship. And sometimes it's concatenating a bunch of scripts together and making sure they're imported in the right order. And sometimes it's writing new syntax like ES6 and transpiling down to ES5. That was the original idea for Babel. And there's been a lot of evolution in build tools since then. We can't really talk about them all, but we'll talk about what's new in the third age compared to the second age. The third way in which these ecosystem is evolving really comes from frameworks. So of course, we all love frameworks. We all hate frameworks in different ways. Angular was kind of the original beast alongside of Backbone. Meteor, I actually consider kind of a framework because they had their own Blaze UI But they also were the first sort of full stack framework and even VC backed, and that was a very interesting journey as well. But obviously, React is the predominant framework of our time today, and Vue and Svelte came along afterwards as well. But I think it has become a lot easier to write front end apps with components, with local state that's easy to reason about and self-contained. And I think that's been the real evolution here, because the original JavaScript scripting language was not designed for any of that, and so the idea of components has really taken hold in the second age of JavaScript. So that's the story so far. We have multiple threads, and I kind of lay everything out in terms of year by year. So you can see, the runtimes, the standards in red, the runtimes in green, the libraries in blue, and the build tools in orange. And it's shifting, right? Like the standards are not so much the focus. There's increased emphasis in build tools. I'm trying to give you that sort of visualization of like what's going on here. I probably should put in another color for frameworks, but I just ran out of colors. But that's the brief history of the first age and the second age. A lot more development actually happening in the second age in the ecosystem, because we have a strong foundation. And the first age was more about developing the language in itself. Okay. And finally, the thing I would raise is that there's been a shift left in developer tooling, and that's ongoing. It's not the end yet, but I definitely see that in the second age, with the increasing emphasis on TypeScript, tests, the language server as evidenced with the rise of VS Code. So if you want my thesis on this, I've given 2 talks on this: Svelte and the Great Space Elevator on my YouTube, as well as growing a meta language for those people who like React. This is a common idea. These are not specific to any frameworks. The whole idea is that you catch your bugs quicker and you iterate faster if you shift left in the development process, right? If you imagine from the left, it's when you write your code, to on the right when you deploy your code in production. It's more expensive if you only catch your bugs in production. If you want to shift it all further and further left, you catch them faster and you iterate faster and you're more productive, and it costs less to the business as well. So there's a very strong business case for shifting left. So let's talk about the third age now, because we're in 2021. We're well into the third decade of JavaScript, I guess. in terms of my terminology and dating, even though there is a decent debate about when the exact start dates and end dates are, but you get the drift. Like, this is a new era that we're trying to think about. And I think that the main overarching thesis or pitch is that we're clearing away legacy assumptions that JavaScript used to have, for whatever reason, for historical reasons, essentially. That's that's such a weak, it doesn't even feel like a prediction. It just feels like that's what's happening right now. Like, so it's just fact. But the prediction really is that this is the dominant theme for the next 10 years, and something that we are really looking forward to, should invest in, and should pay attention to and contribute to, maybe. And the 2 elements of this I really stress is that, one, we're kind of moving off of CommonJS into ES modules everywhere. And this is helped along by the death of IE 11, which is also going to take place within this decade. That one we know for sure, because there's an actual deadline to this. And then the second part, which is JavaScript tooling, which we've built up this like mess of like just tool, and then we kind of link them together, and we need to hire a whole team to manage a Webpack config or whatever. We like that to simplify. We like that to be a lot faster as well, because it's very easy for all this CRUD to just pile up over time. So people exploring writing tooling in TypeScript or Rust or Go, as well as collapsing all the layers of tooling that we've built up over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So first, we'll talk about the third age moving into ES modules and the death of IE 11. So what's an ES module? Most people watching are already going to know it. It's basically using imports and exports. That's the simple version of this. But really, if you want to analyze the details, you should go check out the spec, because there's a lot more design considerations that are built into this, which I really enjoy reading about, because you never really appreciate this until you look at, all the niche use cases that you don't think about until you actually run into them. The key point is that it's now supported in browsers. So when you're doing development, you actually don't need to bundle, and that actually increases your development speed by quite a bit. In production, you're still going to want to bundle. That's the recommendation of the V8 core team, especially if you're going beyond 100 modules, because you don't want to download like thousands of npm packages into the browser. In the future, there's always going to be this is still not done. So there's still features that are meant to be built into the ES modules, particularly export maps, which I didn't mention here, which I guess can roll up into native bundles, but also official loader hooks, because the Node sort of loader system is a hack and has never been supported. But that's the only way in which libraries like TS Node actually function. So we need an answer to how that works, and hopefully to have that in the browser as well. Okay. So things are going to be much faster. That's the bottom line. So here I've benchmarked, air quotes, create React app versus Vite, which is the new build tool from the Vue ecosystem. And here I've kicked them off simultaneously. And you can see how much faster Vite is going. Vite is on the bottom and create React app is on the right. And that's the install. That's fine. It's not really a big deal. And here I already have Vite running, like, because it takes no time to start up. And create React app is still happily installing, and it's just running as it does. It just, once you've tasted the ES module's future of build tools, you could use Vite, you could use Snowpack, you could use WMR. There's a bunch of these out there. But once you've used any one of these, the old generation where you require bundling just to get stuff running in development just feels antiquated. So let's just not do that anymore, right? Okay, so there are limitations. So I talked to you a little bit about the V8 team's recommendation. Oh, it looks like it's 300 modules, but they recommend 100 modules maximum before you start needing to bundle in production, and you get there pretty quickly with the modern JavaScript stacked. And I think the other element, so check out all these projects, and I just mentioned them already. The other limitation primarily is that ES modules are supported in all browsers except for Internet Explorer. So it's always going to be limited by whether or not and how much you need to support Internet Explorer. So I do have good news on that front. We're tracking the death of IE 11 slowly but surely. And over the past year, I've been tracking this for the past year and a half. And over the past year, there's been some pretty big names, like Twitter.com is dropped IE 11, Dailymotion, LinkedIn, Microsoft itself on all its major commercial properties like Microsoft Teams and Office, Adobe, GoDaddy, Skillshare, a lot of really well-known names, and probably I think it helps you make the case if you work at a peer company to one of these companies that have dropped, to make the case to your management. That's just why I'm very keen on collecting examples of people who've dropped IE 11 support in every industry. So if you have an industry that's not represented here, please reach out. I would love to feature you on my list of people who've dropped IE 11, so that it builds the case for others, and it's a collective action that helps to eventually kill IE 11. This on the left is the browser traffic to government websites, U.S. government websites. And why I highlight this is because the U.S. government or U.S. Digital Service has a rule that if it's a 2% support rule. So they have to support any browser with market share above 2%, and market share is measured by visits to their own websites. And this number has been dropping. So it was 3.6% IE 11 visits in November 2020. It now is 2.6% as of this year, 3 months later, and it's really dropping precipitously. I think there are a number of reasons as to why this is going on. I think we're sort of crossing the threshold, and it's a new year, and new budgets and replacements and all that. It will never truly go away. And of course, your particular company, if you have to deal with this, you probably have like on the order of 8 to 10% Internet Explorer. So it'll never truly go away. But for the vast majority of the web, it will, and that will speed up. It'll allow us to assume less. It will allow us to transpile less, and basically ship much less JavaScript in the long run. So I'm really looking forward to the day the US government drops IE 11, and given the rate that it's been dropping right now, it could be this year. So that's the headline. If the US government drops IE 11 this year, I think it'll start dropping in a lot of other places as well. So the official end date of support is 2035, but that can be extended to 2037. But it will be 2025 and 2027. But it will be over by 2030. That's something that we at least know for now. The final nail in the coffin is that, of course, Microsoft Edge also has an IE mode. So your customers can actually upgrade to Edge, and they can use whatever apps that they still need to use IE and in IE mode. But at least their default browsing mode will be in a modern evergreen browser. So that's a really good thing. Adoption is happening. It's really tripled of ES modules. Adoption of ES modules is happening. It tripled in the year 2020. And this year, 2021, it's even going to go crazier because Node now has ES modules by default unflagged. And Sanjay Soros is rewriting his 1,000 modules in ES modules only. So he's really, this year seems to be the year that a lot of people are sort of biting the bullet and just going, all right, this is painful, but we all got to do it. And this is the year because like a bunch of stars have just aligned, and now's the time. So I really want you to be aware of this trend, to help it along. It takes a little bit of effort from all of us, but we can do it because and the time is now. I know it's been a long time coming. All right. So the next section is the other element of the third age, which is a new generation of tooling. So Brandon Dale from Facebook actually called this in 2018. Says in less than 5 years, most popular JavaScript tooling won't be written in JavaScript. So let's talk about why. And so the assumptions that we've always had for a long time, even when I was kind of trying to build dev tools in JavaScript, is that it's JavaScript dev tools and build tools have to be written for JavaScript developers by JavaScript developers in JavaScript, right? So that we can contribute and understand to the tools that we use. That's the egalitarian assumption. Look, it's open source. Everyone can contribute. So it has to be in JavaScript so that we reduce the barriers to entry. The other assumption is that we have to have this Unix philosophy. That's what does well. It's that you have a thing that does one thing well, and then you can link it up modular in terms of modular phases with other tools that also do one thing well. And I think we're starting to question these two assumptions quite a bit. So the first very obvious one, which is kind of a cop-out, but whatever, is that we're no longer writing pure JavaScript. TypeScript basically took over the library ecosystem at least. So here's me sort of tracking React ecosystem library adoption of TypeScript, and here all these libraries basically have their core written in TypeScript now, except for React itself. Gatsby also has been rewritten in TypeScript. And of course, the support matrix or the interest matrix of TypeScript is just off the charts. 72% would use again, and basically about 11% not using. So that's what's going on with TypeScript, and that's amazing to watch. You also see the speed opportunity here. So ESBuild is a alternative to Webpack that's written in Go. That's about 100 times faster than its pure benchmarks. And just because the hot paths are written in a compiled language, that's an opportunity to optimize some things which are just run thousands and millions of times by us. That doesn't really have to be in JavaScript because it's not really touched that much. You can also see this in some other projects. So other projects use Rust as their core instead of Go. So Deno, Relay, and Volta are all examples with like pretty significant chunks of Rust in their code base, and they've been sort of recent converts as well. And I think this is a trend. This is a solid reason for converting, and for anything that is core to our tooling, we should be looking at polyglot tooling, having something us having all our hot paths being really optimized, but then having a nice outer layer. And so this is the thesis that I call systems core scripting shell, because we as JavaScript developers still want to write plugins. We still want to interact with the tool in a fashion in which we think is understandable to JavaScript developers, but the core of it, which the core maintainers touch, and no one else really does. There's no reason for that to be in JavaScript, and it's really apparent that the performance opportunity that we get from rewriting the core or just building new tools with the core assumptions being in non-JavaScript is too much. Like we can no longer ignore that. So that's the whole idea behind systems core and scripting shell. I think that's going to be trending a lot more. The other thing is about the Unix philosophy and what functions belong together. So I really like this anecdote from Benedict Evans. In the 1980s, if you installed a word processor or spreadsheet program on your PC, they would not come with word counts, footnotes, or charts. Those were extra plugins that you had to buy and sort of hook up together. And so his argument was more of like an antitrust argument, like, what is competition, what is the platform supposed to have versus the people that work on the platform. But it's useful for us as well, because when we think of a word processing document, we just think of this. Like when I print something, I want all these options available. I don't want to have to buy plugins and wire them together and make sure all the versions kind of sync up. We just redefine the job of what a word processor is. The more we use it, the more we understand that all these things live together, and therefore they should be provided together by the same provider. And that's what's really going on, right? We evolved all this different tooling. We got TypeScript and Babel and Prettier and linting and testing and these are all like great in their own right, and they do a very good job. But the intersections, the interfaces are where it really starts to hurt. Like I need like 10 different config files just to keep all of this in order. And the moment I break one of them, it's just a mess to debug, because they all don't speak the same language. It's also very slow. For example, if you're all running all running passes of their own ASTs, then you have to wait for all of them to run, instead of having a single pass where with knowledge of every single job that needs to be done through them. Okay, so typically to deal with that, historically we've just swept all of this under a rug. And that's what Create React App was, right? Like it started with this really complex situation and was simplified by Dan Abramov with Create React App into a single package called React Scripts. But that's really just bundling all this up into a single npm dependency. It's not really like it's pretty brittle once you want to change anything. Well, it doesn't let you change anything. And that's the general way that we've been proceeding in the second age of JavaScript, which is building up React distros. So if you want React with DevTools, you get Create React App. If you want React with DevTools and routing, you get Next and Gatsby. If you want state and data, components and hooks, then you get the layers on top of Next.js. And there are a lot more other React distros, which I talked about in my blog post on this. But I think the way forward in the third age of JavaScript is collapsing layers into a single tool. So Rome is designed to replace Babel, ESLint, Webpack, Prettier, and Jest, and others. And Deno kind of builds the same things into the binary itself for running Deno. So I think that's where we're going. I think we should invest in that, and we think we should thank these pioneers for showing the way. But we should really start to reimagine like what we could do if we just knew everything that we know today from scratch. And that will bring us much faster tooling as well as lower configuration tooling, which we all want. Okay. So the last part of this talk, the death of JavaScript. What is, there's a lot of growth in JavaScript. What's going to be the end? And obviously I take this inspiration from the birth and death of JavaScript. Most of you are going to have seen it. Some of you are not. So I have to mention it because it's such a fantastic talk, which this talk is kind of an homage to. And the real prediction is that we're all after this sort of universal virtual machine where you sort of write code once and run it anywhere. And Brendan Eich has always said that you should bet on JavaScript to do this, but he's changed it recently. He's changed his philosophy, and he actually told me when I questioned him about the universal virtual machine that it's probably WebAssembly, and he didn't think about it in those terms then, but it's pretty clear that that's what it was. So I highly recommend watching Gary Barnhart's talk on the birth and death of JavaScript, as well as paying attention to what Brendan Eich is talking about when he talks about WebAssembly. So that's the gist. It's a very broad, overarching historical thesis, and we're still in the middle of it. So I will probably be wrong on something, but it's a discussion piece. It's a like theory, right? And theories can be wrong or right, but it's presented to you for argument or disagreement. If you want to learn more about spotting mega trends like this and thinking about how to invest in technologies and bet on technologies, I did write a book about how this applies to my career. I used to have my former career as an investment analyst, and now I think and write about JavaScript all day long. So you can check out my book at learningpublic.org. But otherwise, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane and speculation into the future. Thanks.
SWYX, that was a brilliant talk. Inspirational stuff to start us off on day 2 of CityJS 2021. Roll on 2030 when we can ditch some of this tooling and just enjoy the JavaScript goodness. Please do join me in giving SWYX a huge around the world round of applause. Our first Q&A of the day will be starting any moment now over on GatherTown, so please do join us there where you can pose your questions to SWYX about the future of JavaScript and maybe get some insight into some of the other things we can expect over the next decade in the JavaScript land. If you're not on GatherTown, please do let us know what you thought of that talk in the comments section on YouTube, or post along on social media using the hashtag CityJS2021.
Sean, welcome very much to our Q&A session, or SWYX, should I say. Thank you very much for that brilliant talk. I think we've been in GatherTown answering some questions, so I'm going to kick us off with one of my own, and it comes off of the back of the preamble we've just had. You're talking about that talk came from a blog post that you made. Yesterday, we had a couple of speakers say that they see that creating content online is a great way to improve their brand, particularly if they are a newbie to the industry. Do you echo that sentiment? Would you recommend that the people watching along with this start creating content and putting it out there?
I encourage people to create content, but I don't like creating content with the purpose of creating a brand for yourself. That's a side effect rather than the primary goal. The reason that I discourage that is because it forces it. People generally tend to make themselves into sort of an artificial sort of image of what they are instead of being just authentic and pursuing their interests. Like when you set out with that explicit task of creating a brand for yourself, you start to become, not someone that's very relatable. You might not admit flaws, and you might actually cause harm because you might present yourself to be an expert when you're not. And I definitely don't want anyone who does learning public to do that, because that's very harmful to the movement and harmful to the rest of us who are just trying to share what we learn.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Time and a place. But I do think that creating content generally is a good way of showcasing your knowledge. I just, like you say, people sometimes try and build themselves up when they shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not for that. And people tend to burnish, there's a thing, like the people who create content, a lot of them are motivated by different motives. And someone who does it with bad intentions makes the rest of us look bad. And it really, really damages the whole enterprise, and causes the people who are genuine about it to really be turned off. And I really campaign against that as much as possible. If what I would say is that if you do pursue your interests and you throw your maximum effort at it, it will be recognized and you will naturally grow a brand out of it. But it will come as a result of you growing your expertise in public, and you will have to earn it. You cannot just fake it. You cannot just throw a bunch of money or branding at it. You just have to work at it until you become the world's foremost authority on something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think Andre's said it best in the chat there. It's not about showing your knowledge, it's about disseminating knowledge. I think if you go into it with that goal, you'll end up at the right place, right? We've actually had a question come in, so I think we can crack on with that one. Wasn't it Java who advertised with write once, run everywhere on their JMV back then? I recall Java applets being everywhere, even on radios in cars. That's from Andre.
Yeah, I'm sure Andre has a longer perspective on that if you want to chime in. Yeah, so what? It didn't work. Um, and probably it's something that we still want. And that's my sort of dig on React Native, which is that the React Native's tagline is that, okay, write once, run everywhere did not work. So we want you to learn once and write everywhere. The fact of the matter is that, you know, when people write React Native, they go for the code sharing. So people brag about their 90% reusable code between Android, iOS, and web. And that is basically another form of write once, run anywhere. And if WebAssembly or embeddable JavaScript gets us there, then sure. Maybe we just needed a few cracks at this goal, but just because it didn't work for Java doesn't mean it's a failed vision.
No, definitely not. I think it's you learn from the mistakes of Java and everybody else that's tried to put this into place. Okay. So I have heard from a little birdie that you've got a book out. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that might be a good place for a jump off for a few questions.
Okay. Oh, sure. Yeah. Part of the I guess as a result of blogging, you get a lot of feedback on the topics that people are interested in. And as much as I tried to do technical and non-technical talks, is actually, sorry, non-technical and non-technical blog posts, it actually ended up that the non-technical stuff got a lot more traction, for better or worse. So I figured I should flesh that out into broader thoughts on career advice in general, and especially for transitioning from junior to senior. And it's a very difficult thing to give advice to a general population without context, because it's almost certainly not going to be 100% applicable. The best you can hope for is to write down some general principles that hopefully people might adapt to their own situations, and then create a community where people can discuss and continue the conversation. I think when you write a blog post or a book, it's actually best served if you're at the beginning of a discussion rather than as a decided fact from the heavens. And this is the one interpretation of it. I'm going to turn off my Discord because it's going a bit nuts.
Are they all like, you're live on Zoom? You're live on Zoom. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's one more question's come in. So if you've got a 60-second answer to this, that'd be perfect.
Appreciate all these questions, Andre. So I'll read it out. Do you see a risk on having run JavaScript everywhere? It's not strictly a secure language. Okay, how to expect that when having design time of 10 days? Yeah. Do I see a risk? Sure, there's a risk. Yeah. I mean, we're stretching it to do things that it's not meant to do. But it's actually more secure than some others with low-level access to things. So I don't know about whether it's a secure language or not, compared to whether it's run in a secure runtime. And that's why I think you see efforts in like Deno, which have a bit more of a security mindset compared to Node.js. But if you want something more than that, then you probably are looking at something like a WebAssembly with WASI is looking very interesting for, it's pretty weird. Like WebAssembly's original vision was to run in the browser, but it turns out that maybe the biggest impact of all might be WebAssembly outside of the browser. And it's a pretty fascinating field there.
Yeah, it is. So we've got less than 60 seconds left. So we're going to throw some rapid fire questions at you like we have been with all of our speakers. We're just taking a survey of the developer landscape at the moment. So we'll start with the important one, tabs or spaces?
Spaces. Yeah, but I type tabs, but it comes out spaces, and it is okay. I've heard accessibility arguments for tabs, but I think they're very stretched.
Fair play. Front end or back end?
What? Both.
Perfect answer.
I'll say, okay, I say that I started out front end because it's an easier place to start. You get rapid feedback. But I do think that there is a front end career ceiling that very few people talk about. Actually, asked this question of Chris Coyer, and you can look up this question in Shop Talk Show, his podcast. How many CTOs have front end backgrounds? Very, very few. How many VP of Eng have front end backgrounds? Very, very few. If you pick a front end career, you are probably statistically not intentionally limiting your career progress. And it's just a fact, and it sucks, but and there are exceptions, but that's just the way things are.
It's interesting that you say that, but I can't say why because we're running out of time. One final question: apples or bananas?
Apples, because bananas are just too sweet. I love bananas, and but like I have to pick apples every time.
Fair enough. SWYX, thank you very much for joining us for this Q&A. It's been a pleasure to have you be a part of this conference. If you are watching along, please do pop along to the other sponsor booths, meet up with the sponsors and win yourself some prizes. There are some really, really good ones out there, but I've left my notes in the other room, so I can't tell you what they are. But they are there. They're really, really good.
I also welcome anyone who wants to continue conversation to just ping me on Twitter, publicly or in DMs, and we can continue this. So many great questions here, and really appreciate you guys spending time with me.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. SWYX, thank you very much, and we'll see you over the rest of the conference.
All right, bye.